People are very familiar with your analysis of the current world events that are going on, the current conflicts, the U.S. proxy wars, the U.S. backed wars. But I want to get to, and people know that you were a UN weapons inspector and that you said there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that the whole thing was a farce and to get us into that war. So I think people are pretty familiar with that. But I want to get into how you even became a UN weapons inspector. Like, what was your background? Did you join the military right out of high school? Where did you grow up? Let's start there. Where did you grow up?
Well, my father was a career Air Force officer. He spent 26 years in the Air Force, a commissioned officer. My mom was a nurse, a commissioned officer also. She had a very serious injury early on and she was medically retired. But she continued to be a nurse her entire life. Everywhere we moved, she got a job. She specialized in newborns,
Oh.
pediatric, the premature babies. That was her specialty. Um, but we were raised all over. Every 2 years, we packed up and moved to a new location. This was during the Cold War, so my father spent a lot of time overseas in various hot spots. He was in Turkey right after the Cuban Missile Crisis when they got rid of the Jupiter missiles and replaced that nuclear capability with F-100 Super Sabres that were on strip alert with a nuclear weapon strapped underneath them. He deployed as a maintenance officer with that squadron. He did a couple tours in Vietnam with the 10th Air Commando Scotia Tigers, introducing the F-5s to the Vietnamese Air Force. He did a tour in Korea after the Pueblo incident when they sent F-106 Delta Darts to Korea to beef up our military presence there. In the 1970s, we moved to Hawaii, and he was involved with the Pacific Air Forces there. He spent a lot of time in Vietnam doing the Vietnamization program. We hosted a Vietnamese refugee family after the fall of Saigon. Um, it was interesting times. And then from Hawaii, we got sent back to Turkey. I went to high school in Hawaii, ninth grade. I went to high school in Turkey, ninth, 10th, and half of 11th grade. Turkey was phenomenal. I can't describe what it was like growing up in Turkey in the 1970s. You had terrorist bombings. You had guys shooting at your school bus. It was just a grand adventure for us. Terrible for my parents, but to be a teenage kid in that environment was. Plus, it was Turkey's just a wonderful place to live. The culture, the language. I learned how to speak Turkish. I was in the Boy Scouts. We spent a lot of time exploring Turkey. Then we moved to Germany. I graduated from high school in Germany, West Germany at the time. Um, you know, when I say Cold War, this was real. I don't know if people understand how real it was. We had 300,000 American soldiers in West Germany ready to go to war at the drop of a dime. That meant they were in the field training all the time. When we
Wow.
arrived there in November of 1977, they were doing the autumn version of winter of Reforger, which is the annual exercise to train how to fly all the troops to Germany, fall in on pre-positioned equipment, and be ready to fight the Soviet army. Where we were was actually one of the lines of defense that the 8th Infantry Division would fall in on, assuming the Russians had broken through. So the farmers' fields were filled with tanks, helicopters flying over. As you're driving to school, you'll have 40 F 104s flying over your head. It was real. My dad was with the 17th Air Force. I'll show you how real it was. We lived next to a place called North Point. North Point was a nuclear weapons storage facility. Um, on occasion, my dad would get called down to the bunker. The bunker is where you go when there's going to be a nuclear war. It's not training, it's real. It's real life. This was back in the day when we were ready to go to nuclear war that quick.
Yeah.
And my mom and dad had a code word that they would say. It meant that gather the kids, hug them. It's going to end. It could the potential for the world to end, and it was the last Babylon. Twice while we were stationed in Germany, my dad called my mom and said, "Alas, Babylon," because he was in the bunker. There was a chance the Soviets were coming across the border, and nuclear weapons were going to go, and we were going to die. And he was just basically saying, "I love you. Goodbye." That was my reality. Every morning when I went to school, I didn't know if there was going to be a home when I came home. Seriously because we lived right next door to the nuclear weapons storage facility that everybody knew was going to be the first place the Soviets hit. So I was imbued with a hyper sense of patriotism. Hyper sense of patriotism. I viewed the Soviets as a living manifestation of evil. And when I graduated high school, I wanted to join the Army so that I could be assigned to the Fulda Gap, so I could be the first guy there when the Soviets came across, and I would be the first guy to kill a commie for mommy. Sounds funny today. It was as real as it gets back then. Better dead than red. Um, and so I joined the Army, and I got to basic training, and they decided that I was officer material, so they sent me to West Point Prep School to get my commission in West Point. I successfully completed that year at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, but decided that the Army wasn't for me. Not because I was against the military, but this was 1979, 1980. Drugs were rampant. Racism was a big problem. And frankly, the army that existed then, I didn't want to go to war with. They weren't warriors. They were anything but, in my opinion. On the base of Fort Monmouth was a Marine Corps communications detachment. And I remember watching the Marines walking across the base, and these were square to wear guys. They were proud of the uniform they wore. They respected one another. Their salutes were smart, snappy. And I said, that's the team I want to play for. And so I turned down my appointment to West Point, which shocked everybody because I had the appointment. And they told me, well, if you turn it down, you have to spend 6 years as an enlisted man. I said, okay. I mean, that's the price I'm going to pay, but I'm not going to West Point unless you allow me to be commissioned in the Marine Corps. They said, no, no, no. That West Point does Army. And so I went out and signed up for airborne training, Ranger training, Special Forces track. And the colonel called me and said, what are you doing? I said, you told me I have to spend 6 years in the Army. He said, I thought you'd come back and ask to go to West Point. I said, no, I told you I'm not going to West Point because I don't want to be a commissioned officer in this Army. And he said, so you're serious about going to the Marine Corps? I said, yep. They released me, honorable discharge. I went to college, got my commission in the Marine Corps. Again, the goal was to be with the team that was going to go to war against the Soviet Union and win, and that was the Marine team. When I was in college, every summer I went to officer candidate school. You're only supposed to go twice, but I I went the first summer and got halfway through, and then I was not physically qualified because of a hernia they detected. So they sent me home, which was horrible because anybody who's ever gotten off the bus at Camp Upshur in the summertime in Quantico, Virginia, and you get attacked, the shark attack by the drill instructors, you don't want to do that again. And I knew exactly what was going to happen. It just terrified me. But I finished it 6 weeks, did the next 6 weeks. I studied Russian history because I wanted to know my enemy. I took the Russian language because I needed to speak the language of my enemy. I read Russian literature because I wanted to know how my enemy thinks. My whole focus was to become an expert on the Russians, on the Soviet Union, so that when I joined the Marine Corps, when I get into the Fleet Marine Force, I could better prepare my Marines for combat with the Soviets. And for 2.5 years in 29 Palms, California, assigned to 5th Battalion, 11th Marines, a nuclear capable field artillery unit, I did just that. We perfected the art of providing nuclear and non-nuclear fire support for Marine maneuver units ready to engage the Soviets in a variety of contingency operations ranging from the Middle East to Europe.